Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. Just letting people in. We are recording this, so you will get a copy of the recording afterwards. I'm going to start in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to let the lobby calm down for a bit, if that's okay. Just give myself a few seconds. If you wouldn't mind, just please do put your cameras on. It's great to see you all. If you could make sure you're on mute, that would be fantastic, just while Philippa is talking. And I'm going to start, if that's okay. So good afternoon. My name's Richard Ayres, and I'm a social care advisor here at Care England. And I want to welcome you to the joint webinar with Hempsons and Care England titled Evidence Preparation to Maximise Scoring under the CQC Single Assessment Framework and Quality Statements. Today is the last in a series of 4 Single Assessment Framework webinars with Philippa Doyle, who's the head of social care at Hempsons, who will introduce herself shortly and take you through evidence preparation essentials to maximise the CQC scoring methodology under the quality statements. And we'll also introduce a very helpful toolkit and bring everything together because we've created quite a lot of content from these webinars and from Philippa's experience. While Philippa's talking, you are free to use the chat facility to raise any questions during the presentation, or you're also free to email me, and I will drop my email address into the chat shortly, so that if anyone wishes to ask a question privately and anonymously, you can send me an email and I will do so on your behalf. As I said, please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation. I will try and go through and mute people if I see they're not on mute. Philippa will take you through her presentation. It's just a few slides, after which we will open up to a wider Q&A session, and we can raise any questions that come up in the chat or have been emailed to me directly. We are recording the session, as I said, and our intention is, as always, to note down any questions raised and send an FAQ afterwards, plus a copy of the recording, usually within sort of 24 to 48 hours of the event, depending on how many questions are raised, along with the contact details of our presenter today, Philippa. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Philippa to take you through her presentation. Philippa.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this 4th session. I can't believe we're into December already, but we are. So, given that there have been so many changes with CQC since the last webinar when we were together in September, as well as talking about how to maximise your evidence preparation, I thought it would also be useful if I did a little bit of a roundup as to kind of where we are now at the end of the year as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I did have somebody recently say they were a little bit starstruck meeting me separately rather than on a webinar, because I do feel like I've done quite a few of these. But for those of you who don't know me, my name's Philippa Doyle. As Richard said, I'm the head of our social care advisory team here at Hempsons Solicitors. Over 25 years experience to my name now, predominantly working with providers out of hospital, so primary care, community care, lots of work with social care providers and court protection matters and information governance. And for some reason, I have ended up becoming a little bit of an expert in CQC, whether that's in challenging them or more recently, doing a lot of training and a lot of advisory work to try and help you present your services in the best possible way, so you don't need me for a challenge. So, a 2024 roundup, what a year it has been. So this time last year, I started doing these webinars and started talking to lots of clients about the new single assessment framework. It had started, we'd had the pilot sites, which all seemed to be quite positive. We had the time frame for the national rollout, and the date of February the 6th seems to stick in my mind, as I think was one of the last areas and the last rollout dates earlier this year with the new process coming. And I was full of optimism about the new way of assessing, and I still am full of optimism, because I think as a concept, it's got the potential to work really, really well. But you do kind of have to sit back and think, what on earth has happened this year? Because all of that potential kind of seems to have fallen apart because the rollout just didn't quite work. The IT didn't really work. There weren't really enough staff to make it happen. We were seeing regularly that reports didn't quite reflect the services. It felt like they were too much AI driven. that the inspector that had been out into the service wasn't actually involved in the drafting of the report. It was all written by somebody else. It was all very disjointed and clunky, and it just doesn't really quite work the way anybody was expecting it to or wanted it to. So it was really good to see that the not so new government now and the not so new leaders at CQC were grappling with the deficiencies and addressing them, because that's absolutely the conversation that I have with providers when they come to me going, what on earth do we do with this? You've got to work out what it is that's fundamentally wrong and fix it. And if there are things that you don't accept, you push back on them. The single assessment framework, in my view, is not going anywhere anytime soon. So now that CQC are grappling with those deficiencies and trying to fix them, we as providers still need to grapple with it as well. You do need to look at the best way to present your evidence to CQC, to showcase your service. And I see my role in working with the sector is helping you to pick apart each of the 34 quality statements and ensure that what you present to the CQC is what they're asking for, so that you can try and get the best possible score. Because the services that I see who are not necessarily hitting the right buttons and they're not scoring as highly as perhaps they would like are the ones that are perhaps not presenting their evidence in the best possible way. Because this is a little bit now like going back to school. And what do we need to say in order to score maximum points on this particular question? So we've had some recent announcements as well. What do they all mean? So we've had Dr. Penny Dash and Professor Sir Mike Richards, who have both reported in recent months. We had Sir Julian Hartley, who started yesterday as the new CEO. Hempsons know him of old. We've worked with him on a number of occasions in various different roles, hold him in very high esteem. I think he's a great person to try and tackle the situation and turn the organisation round. The reports that we saw from Dr. Dash and Professor Mike Richards very much echo the concerns that providers big and small have been talking about for some time now, not just since COVID, but also pre-COVID as well, where we've seen a very definitive shift and the focus has been very risk averse, very kind of going into a service looking for bad rather than looking for good. And it's been very black and white. It's been a very kind of police type approach of you're either compliant or you're not compliant, without any of the kind of grayer or the softer analysis in between or issues around proportionality. Obviously, we've got those huge concerns in relation to the rollout of the IT in relation to the single assessment framework. I hesitate to draw comparisons between Horizon and this, but I know some have. And I know there's been lots of issues as well around whether the staff teams at CQC have really gelled, whether the assessors and the inspectors are properly working together to write those reports that really define your service properly. So CQC has accepted the high-level recommendations out of both reports, and they've set out 4 commitments going forwards. So those 4 commitments are that they're going to align the organisation around sector expertise. So there's going to be 3 chief inspectors at least, 1 on hospitals, 1 on primary care and 1 on adult social care. It's great having this single assessment framework where everybody is assessed in exactly the same way, because the regulations do apply uniformly across the board to every regulated service. But the reality is the service that you're delivering as social care providers is very different to the service that a GP delivers, and again is very different to the service that a hospital delivers as well. You've all got to meet the same standards, but you deliver it in a different way. And so how you assess and inspect those services has to operate in a different way and come with a different mindset as well. So I do think it's really important to have those 3 different chief inspectors so that each sector can operate in a very slightly different way, but underneath the same framework. They've said there's going to be modifications to the single assessment framework, so a bit more on that later, but it is supposed to make it simpler and ensure that it is more relevant to each sector. They've said that they're going to ensure that the right systems and tools are in place to support the regulated activity, which to my mind means they're going to fix the IT sooner rather than later, I hope. And they've also said that they're going to improve the experience for providers who are registering, whether that's adding a new location, setting up a new service from scratch. Again, that sounds to me like they just need to fix the IT and get that process moving. But at least they're recognising it, and hopefully they're getting on with it behind the scenes as well. Modifications to the single assessment framework. Okay. So that's going to enable them to carry out and report on inspections more quickly. And I have heard in the last week that there have been a couple of fast track inspections that have gone through with some newly registered services where it's been a really high level, quick and dirty inspection, and the report has been in its draft process, it's been through a factual accuracy, and it's published, and that's been a 6-week process from end to end. That would be amazing if we could achieve that across the board. Not sure whether that's going to be a reality or not. Not sure whether these reports are too quick and dirty to be meaningful or not, whether we're going to find somewhere a little bit in between. But certainly I've got one provider that I'm working with who was first inspected in February, and we're still arguing over bits and pieces in the report and the factual accuracy process because of all the errors and flaws that have arisen. So, hopefully it'll be somewhere between that 6-week and 10-month period. We'll settle on a timescale. The 5 key questions, the 5 key domains are not going anywhere. So, we're all well used to safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led. Those are not going anywhere anytime soon. The 34 quality statements that I've spent all year talking about and we're all getting our heads around and getting used to, they've said those will be amended, and that will be to ensure clarity and avoid duplication. But we don't know the detail yet as to which one of those quality statements are going to go, how they're going to change, what they're going to look like. The devil will be in the detail. So, watch this space, and I'm sure you'll hear me talking about them in 2025. They announced quite quickly after the Dash and the Richards reports that they were going to stop scoring individual evidence categories. And our interpretation of that at the time was that was a hard line, that, from that day forward, they were going to stop scoring evidence categories. And yet I've seen numerous reports that have still got those individual evidence category scores in them. We had an announcement yesterday, or maybe it was sometime last week, that they've confirmed that actually it was any service inspected from yesterday onwards would be where they would stop scoring those individual evidence categories. So if you've had an inspection and you've got your draft report, or you're waiting for your draft report, you're still going to find those individual evidence category scores in there. And they are potentially something that's going to be relevant when you're looking at any factual accuracy challenge that you might need to do. But anybody where CQC turned up yesterday, or they might turn up tomorrow or sometime next week, the focus should be on the next level up. So they won't be scoring the individual pieces of evidence. They should just be scoring the quality statement itself. So, as I say, we don't know what the detail is yet as to how the quality statements are going to be amended, which ones might be amended, what they're going to look like. The Care Provider Alliance, with Vic Rayner as the chair and Professor Sir Mike Richards, are going to be working together to support CQC to determine what good looks like, hopefully going to be feeding into that process of what the quality statements are going to look like, what ones might need changing. I know the CPA had over 1,500 submissions, and there was only a very, very short window of about 5 or 6 days to make your submissions in as well. But there were a lot of people that had a lot to say about this process and the impact on you as service providers. We're expecting a new kind of handbook as to what good looks like. And what we've already seen in draft form is a document that's called the Characteristics of Key Questions, Ratings and Quality Statement Scores. It's a little bit like, you might remember the old publication that was called Key Lines of Inquiry and Ratings Characteristics, that would say this is what a good, safe service looks like, this is what a requires improvement service looks like. These draft characteristics look very, very similar. We're also expecting Dash 2, so a second report from Dr. Penny Dash, but that's going to be looking at a focus on the much broader landscape of health and care, arm's length bodies, so government bodies, but they're slightly detached from government. So that's really going to be a review of all of the different regulators. And do we look at having kind of a super regulator that regulates the regulators? Do we look at getting rid of all the regulators? What is it that we need to do to make them more effective? Because I know I have lots of conversations with lots of providers who say, well, who regulates the regulator? And at the moment, my response is you. It's only you bringing a challenge, making a complaint, raising an issue that holds a regulator to account. And do we actually need a body above all of those regulators that does that job for you? So I mentioned we've got this draft publication. It's called The Characteristics of Key Question Ratings and Quality Statement Scores. And as I say, I've had a quick read through it. I would urge you to as well. But it does sound and read a lot like the old Key Lines of Inquiry document or handbook. So it is useful. Feedback on it closed a couple of weeks ago now. So hopefully in the new year, we'll have a final document that we can use and read. And it is useful because it does show you what CQC are thinking about when they score you. But I also find it really useful if I'm looking at doing a challenge with a service, because if the description of your service matches their description of what a good service looks like, but the points don't add up and you're not getting the right score, then bingo, you've got a perfect point of challenge there of you saying, well, you're describing this my service, and you've given us a national description of what that service looks like, and that's us. So why doesn't the scoring add up? Ultimately, though, anybody that's been on any one of my webinars or done any training with me will know that, as far as I'm concerned, it's the regulations that are key. Compliance with the regulations, giving CQC what they're asking for under the quality statements, is what is going to showcase your service and is going to ensure that you secure the rating that your service deserves. So if you're meeting the requirements of the regulations, you give CQC what they're asking for under the quality statements, then you should come out as a good, as a baseline. If you're getting something fundamentally wrong, if it's just a one-off, shouldn't be too much of an issue. If you're getting a whole range of fundamental things wrong, that's where you're going to find yourselves down in an RI or an inadequate. But equally, if you can demonstrate that you are flying and you are going way above and beyond, those requirements in the regulations for delivering a good service, then push. And I've worked with a provider only about 6 weeks ago that absolutely felt that they were outstanding and their draft report came out as good. And they've put a factual accuracy challenge in and said, we're better than this. Look at this piece of evidence, look at this point, look at this point. And I'm, absolutely delighted that it worked and they have come out as outstanding. So, it is worth doing. You can get things changed. You've just got to know which buttons to press and how to present the argument to get that positive result. And on that point, challenging CQC, do it. Don't hesitate. Don't worry about, is it going to rock the boat? Is it going to make things difficult for me? Feedback from CQC is that the big providers do it all the times and the small ones don't. And I can see why. It's absolutely about having the time and the money and the resources to sit down and, give up a weekend or 2 weekends or your evenings to go through the report with a fine-tooth comb, to look at what areas you want to challenge, to pull all the evidence together to do it. And there's a real fear and a real reluctance from providers as well to put your head above the parapet, to make that challenge. And particularly if, say, you're a service that's got, 4 or 5 homes or arms of the service provision, you kind of think, well, if I rock the boat on one, does that mean they're automatically going to turn up and look at the other ones as well? And yeah, they probably are, because, you're on their radar and you've piqued their interest. But that process is there for you to use. Yes, lawyers can help. There's, me and others out there that can help you, can guide you through doing it. But you can also do it yourselves. And actually, we're going to be doing a new webinar in the new year that will very much guide you and aid you in how to do a factual accuracy challenge yourself, so that you don't need to spend an awful lot of time and money with me. Maybe kind of halve your costs on that. But the main point for me is that you cannot have a report on the internet floating around forever that is not an accurate representation of your service. It could have a massive long-term impact on your reputation, but it can also have a really big impact on your revenue as well. I'm working with a provider at the moment who's put an awful lot of time and money into turning their service around, and it really is a good service, but the draft report has come out as RI. And there's only a couple of points where we really need to push it just to get them over that percentage point to get them up to good. But if we can't get them up to good, then their insurance costs are going to double. And that's just on the insurance point alone. The insurers have, got black mark against them, are giving them a greater risk rating because they're RI rather than good. Never mind the fact that, families and friends thinking about placing a loved one in their service are sitting there reading a report, scratching their heads going, but, it looks really nice. And we've been round and it looks really nice, but they've still got requires improvement on their report. So now we're going to go to the service down the road as well. So if for that reason alone, I would really encourage everybody to use that factual accuracy challenge process. It's not complicated, but it is just a little bit time consuming, but it is absolutely worth doing for your reputation and your revenue. So that's a bit of a whistle stop in terms of where are we now. What's happened in recent months, what's been said, what might change in 2025. But if they do turn up tomorrow, don't ring me, it's my birthday, I've got the day off. But you do still need to be following the single assessment framework as it currently stands, just without the evidence category scoring. It is still an assessment. It has still got two parts. It's still got paper-based analysis, looking at your processes, looking at your documents, but it has got what CQC term those cross the threshold observations. So when they've come into your service, like an old style inspection, and they're sitting in a corner observing the delivery of care, talking to some of your residents, talking to some of your staff, as well as speaking to yourselves. In the main, we are seeing that they're still asking for a PIR in advance. Used to be an indicator if you got a request for a PIR that you knew they were coming fairly soon. I'm not sure that you can particularly use that as any kind of benchmark anymore, because I think their system just sends them out automatically. So I don't necessarily use it, as I say, as a benchmark for whether that means that they're going to turn up fairly soon, but you need to always be prepared. When they come into the service, they should tell you what quality statements they are assessing you against. And if they don't, then ask them. You're entitled to ask. You're not being cheeky by asking. You need to know what they're assessing you against so that you can make sure that you provide them with the right information to be able to answer those quality statements. They will come in knowing which ones they want to look at to start with, but it may well be during the course of the assessment that they might increase or expand the number of quality statements that they're looking at during the process. So if they uncover something that they don't quite like, then they might bring in an additional quality statement because they want to look at a couple of related points. Again, they should tell you if they're doing that, so that you're able to give them the evidence, give them the information that they need in order to fulfill the requirements of the assessment process. Talked a lot about scoring in the past, but the scoring is the most relevant part of this single assessment framework assessment and inspection process. Points do mean prizes. So we've got the 34 quality statements. Each of those quality statements is going to be scored 1 to 4. 1's inadequate, 4's outstanding. The vast majority of services are going to have 2's and 3's. And those scores are then converted into percentages to give you your ratings. So again, the vast majority of services are going to be somewhere between that 39 and 42% requires improvement rating, or hopefully tipping over into the 63 to 87 good rating. It does make it easier, in my view, having these scores to look at whether you're going to do a factual accuracy challenge and which areas of it to focus on. Because the service that I'm working with at the moment has got 2 of the domains that have been scored 62%. So we know that there are only 2 quality statements that we need to nudge those quality statements up by 1 point to push that percentage into good. And so it makes it really clear and really obvious to you as a service that it's worth doing and where you need to concentrate your efforts and where you need to look at your evidence as to whether you can shift those particular areas. The service that moved from a good to an outstanding, again, was a similar thing. They were scoring 86%. So they knew they didn't need to do much. They just needed to really fine tune their evidence and really focus on what particular areas they wanted to challenge to get that score nudged up to the next level. So it's absolutely worth doing and far easier, in my view, to get those ratings shifted than under the old system, where you were looking at huge swathes of words and paragraphs where you never really knew what the key issue was that CQC were really bothered about as to why they'd held you down on one particular rating. So the main change, as I say, is that at the moment, draft reports coming through are still scoring individual evidence categories. Excuse me, that's not going to happen going forwards. The scoring is only going to take place at the quality statement level. Hopefully it will have more people input and be less AI driven, that it will actually be the inspector that's been out to the service and the assessor that's reviewed all the documentation that will actually write the report together, rather than at the moment we are seeing lots of very computer generated bland reports with bland statements that are repeated throughout the report. They're not personalised, they're certainly not person-centred. So hopefully, as I say, there'll be lots of change in that respect going forwards. But there's 2 points of challenge there already, that if your draft has got those individual evidence category scores in it, then you can see in particular whether they're using evidence in relation to your documentation, maybe in the feedback category or in an observation category. I've seen countless reports where the feedback from staff and leaders will talk about the actual feedback from staff and leaders, but then there'll be a counter comment from CQC that will say, but we saw this in some of the care plans we looked at, or we couldn't find this in team meeting notes. Now, to my mind, that's information that should be included in processes and should be in the processes evidence category, because the feedback from staff and leaders hasn't been, oh, we haven't got this and we haven't got that and we don't do this and we don't do that. That's what CQC found themselves by scrutinising the documents. So whilst we've got that individual evidence scoring going on, let's challenge it, because things need moving around, and that in itself might adjust the scoring at quality statement level. But also, if when you're reading the report, it just doesn't sound like your service, that's probably because it's been written by a robot. So challenge that as well. You know, it needs to have that personalised element to it. It needs to have some colour that allows a member of the public reading your report compared to reading your neighbour's report to make a difference and make a distinction between those two services, to decide where they want to place their relative or friend. And if there's no colour, if there's no proper description, then there's no point in having the reports at all, because they're just bland and meaningless. So if it just doesn't sound like your service and doesn't feel like your service, then challenge that too. You know, you've got absolutely nothing to lose by putting a factual accuracy challenge in, and actually everything to gain, particularly if you only need to shift 1 or 2 percentage points. So what does good look like? I've talked about this a little bit already. And it is something that providers generally want to know. You want to know what you're aiming for. You know, how do you measure your service against what CQC see a good service looking like? So they've promised the handbook. I think what we're going to get is this characteristics of key question rating and quality statement scores. That might be the document that we're looking for, but do keep watching the website and your emails, because I'm certainly finding on a weekly basis information is coming through from CQC that is useful and is building sort of this portfolio of our understanding of the process. But as I say, good is meeting the requirements of the regulations. Lots of you will know that I do lots of back to basic roundtable training sessions on what the regulations actually say and what they mean. They are so important. They are the fundamental. They're the fundamental standards, but they are fundamental. The clue's in their name. And I constantly link quality statements back to the regulations, because if you are delivering care to meet the requirements of those regulations, then you're ticking CQC's boxes and you're doing what you're supposed to do. So you're going to get that good rating. And the fundamental standards of care themselves describe them as being below which care must not fall. So if your care does drop below that level, that's when you're going to start falling into those requires improvement or worse still, inadequate categories. So meet the fundamental standards of care and you should be pretty much sorted. A note of caution, though, just in relation to rating limiters, because you could be an amazing service and something could just go fundamentally wrong on the day. And the example that I tend to use is IPC, because it does kind of stand out on its own. You could be an otherwise brilliant service, you're getting everything right, you're doing everything right, but you end up with a couple of members of staff who aren't wearing the PPE properly, they've not washed their hands properly, they're not bare below the elbow. They've not done the cleaning properly. There could be, a whole catalogue of issues. And that might end up with you being scored a 1. And if you've been scored a 1, then CQC are not going to describe you as outstanding. They're probably not going to describe you as good either, because there's something fundamentally wrong within that service. So if your key question score is within a good range, so if your safe domain looks like it's within a good range, but you've got a score of 1 or more in one of the quality statements within that domain, then they're going to limit that rating to requires improvement. And certainly the service that I'm working with at the moment, the one that's, just 1 percentage point off good, that's exactly what's happened to them, because there's one area where they've been scored a 1. And so that rating has been limited to requires improvement. It's been limited at 62% when probably it should be, 64 or 65 and well within the good range. So we know where we need to concentrate our efforts and move things higher. And absolutely the same thing applies as well with outstanding. If you're scoring 1 or even a 2 in one or more quality statement, then they're going to limit that rating to good, because they absolutely can't say that you're an outstanding service if you're not getting the IPC right, or there's another fundamental issue somewhere that they need to mark down. So I have heard stories as well of services that have been assessed by an inspector and it has given feedback to say, yeah, you've got eyes all over the place, it's outstanding, but the rating was good. So this was the service where we pushed back on various different points and it was brilliant. They did manage to get it uplifted to outstanding. But I have also seen services where there have been breach of the regulations, but they've still come out with a good. So there is a kind of a real mismatch, if I can get my words out right, as to what the computer system is putting out and what it is generating. So it's really, really important that you go through everything with a fine-tooth comb and really sit there and read it line by line and think, well, does this make sense? And does the evidence actually support that numbered rating, or is there something that we need to challenge here? And you might find that there is just one quality statement that you need to change, or that you just need to provide better or more focused evidence on one particular quality statement to turn a whole domain round, to turn a whole key question round, and to get that up into good that might result in you getting a good overall. So I really can't say more strongly how important it is for providers to go through that process and use that challenge process. So just a reminder about the 5 different evidence categories that we have that apply to social care providers. You've got people's experience, so that's the very people that you're supporting within your service. Your feedback from staff and leaders, so that's the conversations with your staff teams, but also the conversations with you as well. Feedback from partners, talking to your commissioners, other people that are delivering services into your service. The observation, which is the assessors sitting in the corner, wandering around the service, listening and watching to what's going on. And then your processes, which is the biggest chunk really. That's all your evidence. That's your documents, it's your policies, your procedures, it's your care plans, it's your risk assessments, team meeting minutes, all of that information that is collated together that goes to demonstrate that your service is compliant with the regulations. So I mentioned it earlier, but do be very mindful when you're reviewing your report. Have you got comments about observation that have slipped into a feedback category? Has a review of evidence under processes ended up being included in observation or feedback? If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't sound right, then challenge it. Because if little bits and pieces of things can be moved around, as I say, it's a very computer-driven process. You know, if those howevers and those negative comments come out of observation and go into processes, it might change the scoring round completely and adjust your overall rating in that category. So it's absolutely, as I say, really important to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and challenge if it doesn't look or sound right. Quality statements themselves, we all know they follow those 5 domains. There's 34 of them, but each one of them, when we break them down, has got multiple elements to it. Under the old system, we had 303 key lines of inquiry. We haven't lost 260 something of them. They've all been merged together. So when you pull apart the quality statements, some of them will feel like they've got 4 or 5 elements to them. And so that's the exercise that I've done for you. But it's what you need to do within your service as well. And that service that got outstanding recently, this is the exercise that they've been doing since last February, is really pulling apart each quality statement and looking at what evidence they've got within their service that could answer those different quality statement questions and make sure that information was being provided to CQC. So that's what you need to do. You need to work through each one of those quality statements and collect your evidence. And it's about presenting the right evidence to answer the right question. And it might mean that that piece of evidence that you've got, you might need it 4, 5, 6 times, because you might need that same piece of evidence multiple times to answer different questions. But again, think about the fact that, you know, CQC are inputting things into a computer model. Don't just give them that one piece of information and expect them to remember that actually I need to use that for question 4 and question 18 and question 32. You might need to provide that same piece of evidence 3 or 4 times to answer those different questions. So be ready to provide it on multiple times. Think school exam question. All those times the teachers said, don't just write everything you know about the subject. Make sure you read the question and you answer the question and you give the examiner what they're looking for, because that's what's going to score your maximum points. If you write everything you know about the subject and the examiner's got to pick out bits and pieces, they might give you about half marks if you've covered everything. But if you've given them way too much information and you've overwhelmed them, then they're just going to be irritated by it, and then they're going to start marking you down because they're going to think that you don't know what you're talking about. And you absolutely know what you're talking about. You are the expert on your service, and you need to make sure you can translate that information to CQC so that they can see that you're the expert and actually that you're doing a brilliant job. Lots of services used to do it with the old key lines of inquiry. They used to have those 303 standards set out and know what they were going to say in response to each one. Do the exact same exercise with each of the 34 quality statements. It's really good practice. It demonstrates to CQC that you understand the standards and that you can use it as kind of a rolling development tool throughout the year as well. So how do we start this exercise? How do we prepare? It's, you know, hugely daunting. Well, Richard and I have tried across the last year to make life easier for you. So Richard has just told me that Care England have got a YouTube channel, and all of the previous webinars are available on Care England's YouTube channel. So go back and rewatch them to start with. In each one of those webinars, I broke down some of the quality statements into their component parts, and then I rebuilt them for you. So we did one in the first webinar when we looked at SAFE. We did 2 well-led ones, and then we did 4 that all looked at staffing related issues. And what we sought to do was we pulled them apart and we built them back together again. We told you what they meant, and then we told you which regulations were important, and we told you kind of top tips and things that you needed to look at. We've had such amazing feedback that on the back of that, we have created a toolkit which does all of the above for every single one of the quality statements. So we pulled apart all 34 and put them all back together again, telling you what they meant, telling you how they link to the fundamental standards, to the regulations, and then telling you some top tips and things that you need to focus on when you're looking at what evidence you've got within your service. So there's a link there on the page. There's information on Hempsons' website. There's information on Care England's website as well. There's been lots of emails that have gone out as well with links as to how you can acquire a copy of the toolkit. But what I want you to do is I want you to use it as a continual audit and a continual development tool. So I want you to use the toolkit or use the webinars almost like a continuous learning and development plan within your service. To each month, take a couple of the quality statements, pull them apart, focus on how you're going to demonstrate that they work within your service, put some really short timescales and some really specific action plans in place. And that's the way that you're going to see results. If you do a couple of quality statements per month and say, right, this is what we're going to focus on this month, then you'll start to drive kind of real improvement and real development throughout the organisation. And then you can do that on a rolling basis, year after year after year, to build on the work that you've done in each particular area. So it's about being proactive, not reactive. It's about having folders on your network, on your computer system, or in hard copy if you prefer, one for each quality statement. Think about what evidence you've already got within your service that answers those questions. Think about what extra evidence you might need. Think about how you capture information within the service and what you need to do to improve. I see lots of fantastic work going on across loads and loads of different services. And when services let themselves down is because they're not capturing all of the really good work that they do. Your staff teams know your residents better than anybody else, but they're not quite translating that all the time into the documentary evidence. And if you've not got the evidence, CQC are not gonna score you. And as I've said on the slide, have you spotted the theme? It's all about evidence. You know, that old lawyer's phrase of if it's not written down, then it didn't happen, is never a truer phrase than it is with CQC in terms of the way they're working, because, you know, that's the focus going forwards. That's how they assess you. That's how they monitor you. So if you're still thinking, oh my God, where on earth do I start? Lots of different ways to look at it. The beginning is often a good place to start, quality statement 1. But actually, if you remember back to that first webinar, quality statement 1 is hard. It's got a lot of elements to it. It's probably got about 5 or 6 different elements. There's a lot of information linked into quality statement 1. And if you sit there and look at that one and then think, oh my God, they're all going to be like that, then, you know, you just close the book and never look at them again and, you know, run away screaming. So you could start at the other end and say, okay, we're going to do it all backwards. Let's start with quality statement 34, which is under well-led, and well-led is a great place to start as well. But that's all about environmental sustainability. And it's very, very open-ended, and it's very much the unknown. CQC told us they weren't going to assess it in year 1. We're nearly coming to the end of year 1. Don't know whether that's going to start rearing its head next year or whether we'll get another embargo on it for a year. So somebody suggested to me recently, start with those 4 staffing ones. So start with go back to the last webinar that I did, webinar 3, where we did a focus on the 4 quality statements that look at staffing, because everybody is used to working with your staff. Everybody's used to assessing your staff, being clear on training and development and monitoring, and everything that goes with dealing with day-to-day staffing issues. So you could have a focus just on those 4 quality statements that relate to staffing, and that feels like a really manageable place to start because it's familiar. And once you've kind of got your teeth into this is what we need to do for these 4 quality statements, then you'll be able to branch out and say, right, okay, let's start looking at the rest of safe. Let's start looking at the rest of well led. And it might feel more achievable. It might feel more manageable to do. So my suggestion to everybody here, in a kind of post-Christmas, Blue January, whatever you want to call it, everybody's fed up kind of way, is make January a staffing month. Let's have a really big focus from everybody on staff, boost everybody's morale, make them the centre of your attention, and get everybody involved in reviewing those 4 quality statements on staff. Get all of your staff team involved in looking at what evidence you've already got. What could you do differently? What could you do better? What are your neighbours or competitors doing? People who've got friends that work in other services, what's the feedback that they've got from their service? But do it all together. CQC are really, really encouraged by services that have got that continual feedback, that continual involvement from staff right from the ground all the way to the top, of that kind of joint approach. And so every January, you can have that real focus on what are we going to do to improve morale, give everybody a focus, and tick those boxes with CQC along the way in terms of answering those quality statements. And then when you move into February, you can have a clearer view on, right, what's our focus going to be in February? Are we going to focus on medication, for example? Are we going to look at well-led? Are we going to have a focus on caring and make sure that everything that's required in caring, we're actually documenting and we're doing everything that we need to do? So it just gives you, a way to jump into it that isn't too daunting and doesn't mean that you're having to tackle that really difficult quality statement 1, dealing with that learning and development culture. So once you've done January, you can then kind of plan your year, plan how you're going to break the quality statements down, which ones you're going to do in which month. I really would encourage you to focus on safe and well led. They are the areas where there's the biggest potential for breaches of the regulation. Usually where we see them are Regulation 12, safe care and treatment, and Regulation 17, good governance. So they should really be your next areas of focus. Caring should pretty much look after itself, and responsive and effective also kind of fall into place as well if you're getting things right under safe and well led. So those are, the big areas that I would encourage everybody to focus on. And draw up your action plans. CQC love an action plan. They love an action plan that is very focused and very specific and where they can see that you're actually doing things. But if you've got a massive spreadsheet that's got 100 issues on it, you are, with the best will in the world, not going to get through those issues. But if you've got a really short and sweet action plan that's got top 10 issues of what you're going to do in January, you will get through those issues. It generates better results, it generates better change, and you can use it alongside the toolkit, you can use it alongside your quality statement focus as to these are the top 10 things that we're going to look at in relation to staffing in January, and we're going to get them done. And then next month, we're going to move on to something else. So we've got that deadline, because whenever you've got a short deadline and a short list of things to do, you can get through it. So I've spoken a lot. I've spoken very fast for me, obviously. Apologies, but I had a lot to get through. I cannot emphasize enough how much preparation is key for this. It is absolutely going back to school and doing that revision and doing that preparation for exams. Those services that are rated outstanding have prepared every single piece of evidence to absolutely showcase their service. And they've shared the right piece of evidence to answer the right question. So as I say, and I've highlighted it on the slide as well, because I do think it's really, really important in the way that CQC are assessing you now. It is absolutely like a school exam. So do not just write everything you know about the subject and expect the examiner to work it out. Don't just throw everything about your service all at once at CQC and expect them to separate it out. Make sure you are really, really clear. This is for this question, this is for this question, this is for this question. And that's where you're going to get those results. So overall thoughts, CQC, single assess framework, not going anywhere anytime soon. Short-term change, but you do need to engage, you do need to be ready, and you do need to empower your staff as well. Give them confidence. Make sure they understand what's required of them. Make sure you can find a way to capture all of the good work that's going on. And just be really well prepared with your evidence ready in response, because that's going to stand you in really, really good stead for when CQC come calling. Do use the factual actions challenge process. CQC are expecting it, and they will openly say that they're not seeing enough challenges from small and medium-sized providers. Do call me. Care England members are entitled to 20 minutes worth of free advice. I'm not prescriptive on that 20 minutes either. So if we end up being on the phone for half an hour, or we've got a few emails going backwards and forwards, I really don't mind, because I want you to really maximise the best that you get out of your service. But do use my training. Do get in touch if you want that fundamental standards training, going back to basics on the regulations, or I can also do sessions on the single assessment framework as well, and come into your service, pull apart every one of those quality statements, discuss what you've got, what you need, help you maximise and get the best out of your service. But I'm also at the Care England conference next year as well. So do come along and have a word with me then. I will be speaking at the conference as well, undoubtedly about something to do with CQC. Probably a where are we now, what's next kind of session. But Richard has also kindly commissioned another 4 webinars from me as well over the course of the next year. So we'll very much be covering kind of where are we now, and much more explanation and much more work on the single assessment framework as well. We'll also be taking ideas and queries from providers as well. So if there's something in particular that you want me to focus on in one of the webinars, then I would be very happy to do that. As I say, we're already going to have a session that's very much on how to use the factual accuracy process and how to get the best out of it. But also more sessions on, how to use the toolkit as well, and how that can help you maximise your scoring. But do seek advice, do pick the phone up to me, do pick the phone up to Richard at Care England as well. It's what we're here for. Very happy to help and support the sector in any way we can. So that was me talking at high speed. I hope you got all of that, and I hope that was helpful, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Philippa. I really appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure to hear you speak, because you cover all of the really important stuff that we all kind of want to know. And I know you've covered some of this ground before, but it's really important because it's a very complex area, and it's very easy to forget some of what's been said already. And there was one question that went in the chat around, is there still pressure and a drive to go digital for social care records? And is it known if CQC rate this as such? And I think, you've covered that before, but I'll let you answer it. The answer is very much yes, but please do expand on that answer if you can, Philippa.
The world is going digital. So yes, CQC will always prefer a service that is digital rather than paper-based. And I see lots of areas of challenge and lots of issues with services that are in that transition process, where they've still got some paper-based records and they've still got some digital records, because that's where information gets lost, because people don't know where they need to look or where it is. Those services that have made that transition to digital have got the digital services, up and running. The staff have got the training and they've got access to that information. Those are the services that are able to use that technology to their advantage, because it's not just about your care records. It's how you use technology within your own service as well, whether that's call alarms, sensor mats, all of the other, AI facilities that are around and about as well, that can help you help your residents to deliver the best quality service. So CQC will never tell you you must go digital, but that is absolutely the direction of travel, and that's where the best performing services have all got digital systems and really good backups to those digital systems that enable them to showcase their service and to deliver the best possible care as well.
Brilliant, wonderful. There were a few other questions that were asked, Philippa, which I think you covered most of them. If we're not happy with the rating, what do we do? You've talked about the factual accuracy process, and we're going to bring you something in that early next year, which is fantastic. You talked about, the question here was 34 quality centres being amended. How do I know where I should start my focus? And you've covered that as well, around they should tell you, and if they don't, please ask. You talked about the scoring. We thought it was being scrapped. You've clarified that as well, that it's now going to be at quality statement level rather than evidence category level. What do we do if we are assessed before the characteristics and rating scores handbook? You talked about that being promised. Keep watching the websites, looking out for it. Good is meeting the requirements, and why training in the regulations is so important. You also, we had another question, if I need you to provide the same evidence multiple times. Yes, you've talked about that. Answer the exam question. I think that's a great example there. Make sure you read each question and answer that question specifically. And yes, it does mean you might have to provide the same evidence to multiple channels. Where can we find the toolkit? We've dropped that in the... Sorry, Philippa, carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in relation to the toolkit, for anybody that has already purchased the toolkit or is looking at purchasing and is thinking, do I want to buy it when all of these changes are coming? I'd just like to guarantee to anybody who has bought it or is thinking about buying it, once all the new changes have come through and we know what those are, then you will automatically get an updated version of the toolkit for free. So do not think that you are going to need to buy it twice.
That's really, really important to say. Thank you, Philippa, and very much appreciated you're going to do that for us. I think the only other question, one comment that was made, was that if you get a couple of 2s in one of your areas, that could also stop you getting the higher rating. I think that's correct as well, isn't it, Philippa?
Yeah.
Yes, so that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you very much. If there are any more questions, I'll leave the chat open for a little while. Please do pop them in the chat. You can email me directly. My email address is in the chat. You can email Philippa. You've got her details. Please do go directly as well. Really excited to do another 4 of these next year, sort of 1 a quarter, maybe a bit more condensed than that. But as and when something happens and there's a need to say something, please rest assured we'll be working very closely with Philippa to make sure Philippa shares it. And anyone who's registered for our events and webinars before, we'll make sure we communicate to you that we have got a webinar and we've got some material coming out. So just a huge thank you for this year, Philippa, and we look forward to another year ahead of working with you on this.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's it. Thank you very much. I'll just stop the recording. Right, someone just said the recording. Yeah, let me just quickly reply to that one.